Hey guys, how's it going? Ryan Dossie here with Andrew Syrios. This is one of those things. Anytime you're doing something new, you're gonna have mistakes come up. So our first 10 minutes, I totally failed to hit the record button. So we figured, those of you that weren't able to join all of us live, we still wanted to make sure you got the same content. So we're just going to kind of re-go over that section real quick. But for those of you who don't know, Andrew is someone I super look up to, owns several hundred units in Kansas City. They were an Inc. 5000 company just in their rental portfolio. And they were the top 40 fastest growing company in Kansas City last year. So super impressive. He's super active on Biggerpockets. And this particular video, we're actually going to be talking about due diligence. So this is what you should do before you close the deal. Every investor I know has a property that looking back on, they thought, hey, I shouldn't have bought that one. So this is a lot of those my mistakes, Andrew's mistakes, and just things we've learned of, hey, this is the proper things you want to get done first to make sure, you don't get bit in the backside on the back end. So Andrew, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. And I appreciate the praise. Not sure if I deserve it, but I'll try to live up.
I think your head got a little bigger.
Yeah. So due diligence, I think, is the number one area that investors screw up on. New investors screw up on it because they don't know what they're doing, and they skip through it and they get too excited. Even seasoned investors often screw up on it because they kind of get cocky, like, oh, I've been through this a dozen times, I don't do this. And it's one of those things. It's not the interesting or sexy part of real estate, but it's where I see by far the most mistakes. It's where we've made the most mistakes, and it's something you need to get right. I'd say is sort of a supplement to this. I wrote a long piece, almost 5,000 words for Biggerpockets that we'll have linked in the chat, and I'd highly recommend checking that out as well, sort of a supplement to this discussion. But I mean, the long and short of it is start with a checklist. And there's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto I highly recommend reading. But we have our own checklist for due diligence, kind of based on that concept. And I'll just show it to you right here. And so there's four major phases. There's the pre-offer due diligence, the post-acceptance due diligence, and then retrading if necessary. That's just renegotiating. And then the final decision or walking away. And being willing to walk away is the most important part of negotiation.
Absolutely.
If you get too attached, no one gets attached to their G stock or to their Bitcoin. But people get attached to houses. Oh, it's so cute, I need to buy it. But it's just an investment, and that's the way you need to look at it. And so if you're unwilling to walk away, you've given an enormous negotiating advantage to your to the seller or to the buyer in whatever case you're doing. And so each part has different components. We'll start with the pre-offer due diligence. This is just before you're just trying to figure out what you want to do. With regards to the rehab, I highly recommend buying Jay Scott's great book, the book on estimating rehab costs. It's probably the best.
We'll link to that in the description as well.
Definitely worth checking out. With regards to learning rehab costs, I think the best way to do it is, you can go to homeadvisor.com. You can talk to other investors. You can do all sorts of things like that. But the best would go to Home Depot and look at the cost of things. The best two ways, I think, are one, to beforehand is to evaluate contractor bids and lots of them. Don't just get one bid, but what do they have a toilet cost? What does a medicine cabinet cost? And on and on and on. You start to get a feel for what these things cost in your mind. And the other is to look back at former projects. Like, okay, so this is a similar project to one I just did, unless there's some major reason that one went wrong. This will probably cost somewhat similar to that. It's one of the best ways, because people, I don't know. I mean, I've never met an investor who had a problem with over budgeting all the time. So I assume you haven't either. My mistakes have always been on the under budgeting side of things. But yeah, we have a Jay Scott goes over 25 different points to look at, key systems. I added one. I split the foundation from the basement, and this is what our sheet looks like. And I'm happy to share this. Ryan will leave a link with all these documents. You can also just send me a colleague request on Biggerpockets, and I'll send it right away. You have to be colleagues to share documents, so you have to send me a colleague request. But as you can see, we just go through each item, and I give a quick estimate of what I think it will cost, and then I add the contingencies. Add a little bit for knickknacks like light fixtures and whatnot. I add a sewer line contingency. If I'm not sure about the electrical, I'll ask the electrical contingency. punch out items, holding costs, it costs money to not rent out or sell a property. And then I add a 20% contingency on top of that because there's things you miss. You always miss stuff. Or things they work when you think they work at the beginning, and then they stop working once a load has been put on it and the people have lived there for a while. So there's different ways to do this. I don't want to say there's not one perfect way to do diligence, but you should always do it the same when you found out your way. For example, Jay Scott, like I put a 20% contingency on top of it. Jay Scott just rounds up on each item. So if it's a $150 toilet, he'll put $200 down there. So there's different ways to do it, but you want to have a very consistent system that's built within this framework, but tailored for your own needs.
I did a video on holding costs recently. Doing bird deals last year, we had 98 grand in holding costs. So had we done the typical 75% minus repairs, we would have got absolutely slaughtered. But we started budgeting in an extra $5K per deal and actually came out quite a bit ahead. Other funny thing with Jay Scott, I know some wholesalers that tried to sell him some stuff. And Jay has a reputation that every respectable investor should have. And that's, I have a formula. And this deal either fits my numbers or it does not. The particular investor pitched Jay a deal. They were like $1,200 off. The investor was like, come on, come up. This is a deal. And Jay was like, no, it doesn't work for my numbers, and just walked away. That right there is the perfect example of how you should approach pretty much anything real estate related.
Inspiring, actually. You also want to look at a financial analysis too up front. And an evaluation and a rental analysis. Now, I don't think we want to get too much into this. That's some time for another discussion, but real quickly, with regards to analyzing a house, the best thing, MLS, if you can get it, Zillow or Redfin, or Trulia if you can't, and just look, you want to find nearby recent sales that are similar and kind of adjust. Like if you're looking at a 2-bath and you're comparing to a 1.5 bath, you need to adjust that price of that sale, not your property, that sale up a little bit. And try to make them the same and figure out approximately what they're worth. If you're looking at apartments, you want to get more into cap rates and IRR, which is, I've got some other articles you can look up on those things.
Andrew's like Rain Man.
Maybe. I haven't counted cards yet. That's my brother. My brother, well, he's poker, not blackjack. But as far as those go, you want to use real numbers whenever possible. Don't you get their actual operating statements. Don't simply rely on a pro forma. And if they don't have a terrible operating statement, which is not, or no operating statement, which is not uncommon for mom and pop owners, you want to piece it back together yourself. Don't rely on what they have. And a pro forma looks kind of like this. I'll share that to you briefly. But again, this is for another discussion, so we'll just touch on this really quick. But it looks like this. You have your unit, your income, your vacancy, your different expenses, and then you get your net operating income. The cap rate is simply your net operating income divided by the price. And then after that, you take into account your debt service and you get your cash flow. And then you want to compare the cap rate to cap rates of similar properties, similar apartments and offices that have sold recently. And finally,
why don't you touch on CapEx real quick?
Oh yeah, CapEx. So I always include a line item for recurring CapEx, or as banks call it, replacement reserve. And this is like, so for example, a lot of owners will not, they don't consider, like the roof will only go out at once every 30 years. So we don't include that. And we'll capitalize it when we put it on. But if you're owning a property long term, that is an expense that you need to basically account for every year. You're paying 1/30 of a roof every year. And so we always put in a recurring CapEx for those large ticket items that will go out recurringly as we own the property: HVAC, the parking lot, the roof, all sorts of items like that. And also I should note, when you're analyzing a property, the biggest thing to look for that might be hidden in an owner's operating statement that can skew things is operating expenses that are capitalized, and then they're not put on the operating statement, they're put on the balance sheet. And so I've seen, owners capitalize replacing carpet, replacing appliances, it's like, this is really pushing it. And you need to count, because that's something that's just, especially if you're looking at an apartment complex, you're always going to be doing that as you own the property. You need to account for that as an operating expense, because it will be an operating expense. You will suffer, if you can have your income statement can look fantastic, but if you're spending enormous sums on a consistent basis in capital expenses and just putting it on the balance sheet, you're not going to make any money. You have a great looking income statement, but you're not going to make any money. So
that was one of the big things that I really got from you, but that I also hated when I first started working with you. I'd send Andrew a deal and I'd be like, man, this thing's screaming. And he'd be like, okay, here it is back. And I'd be like, how does it lose money now? I don't understand. So I think as a newer investor, understanding what CapEx actually is and that it makes tons of sense. I mean, look, if your plan is buy and hold for a few years, great. That's not mine. It's not what Andrew's up to. So if you're going to own it long term, even if you do it up front, even if I put a brand new roof on, I mean, I'm only 25. I've got some years left. I'm going to have to put another roof on. So planning on that in CapEx is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, it's a good point. Like, it's a good point to argue when you're negotiating for price. I mean, they'll be like, well, the cap rate's this. Like, no, you got to include recurring capital expenses. And so, no, it's not. It's this.
Most mom and pop multifamily owners do not understand cap rates. Like you get into that and they're like, oh yeah, so you're going to pay me 4 times what it's worth. And it's like, no, you're leaving some stuff off here.
Yeah, I've seen it. Unless you're dealing with like, noteworthy company or companies that have some experience or investors that have experience, you're going to see some catastrophes of operating statements and financials, and you just got to find a way to work through them.
Chances are, if they don't have good books, they're not going to understand what a cap rate is.
No.
Just a thought.
But you still want to analyze using the cap rates. And then the next area up front is area analysis. And this is, you don't want to buy in a really rough area. Let me pull this up here. We bought one apartment complex in Kansas City, in a really rough area. I thought, it's got to work. It's got to work. Because it's so cheap. But it just kept bleeding. We rehabbed out a lot of the equity because it's just the cheap units. They didn't rent for much. We had a lot of turnover, a lot of delinquency, a lot of damage when people left. It's just constantly throwing us out. We finally sold it, and then once we sold it, we the week after, my property manager sends me this, and so now it wasn't our tenant who did the shooting, but the tenant we placed in, but nothing else. I think that's a good sign of what. I mean, there are investors who can do very well in rough areas. There are good tenants in those areas. We've experienced this for sure, but it's something you got to specialize in. I would never recommend a new investor start there, and I wouldn't recommend anyone dabble there. It's something that if you got to be specialized in that niche, so you know Section 8, know how to deal with that, know how to rehab properties that's paying a large amount of money. Not something I'm good at. I would recommend any new investor stay away from.
The vast majority of investors, it's why Ben Leibovich on Biggerpockets is constantly preaching about not buying $30,000 pigs.
Absolutely.
It's, they look great on paper, but the actuality typically ends up being quite a bit different.
Yeah. It looks good on paper, but it only looks good on paper. And so, I mean, ways to tell this. I mean, first of all, just driving the neighborhood. If there are a lot of vacant properties or burnt out properties that haven't been repaired, or overgrown lawns, or cars that are that are broken down, sitting in driveways, or people just hanging out in the middle of the day, looking like they're up to no good, or just like no pride of ownership or whatnot. That's a great sign. Talking to locals. I once talked to a friend of mine, kind of got caught in the same problem, buying a fourplex in an area that was not good. And he had it under contract to sell, and the seller went there the last day before closing, and talked to the neighbor and she was just complaining about all the prostitutes and drug dealers that were hanging out at his property. And shockingly, that buyer backed out, and he was not able to sell it. And so those are great things. There's also some web tools, some really good ones. There's some really good ones that are expensive, like Argus or some like GSI stuff, but some free ones like for demographic information, citydata.com is great. You can actually go down to the very subdivision and get income data and whatnot. You can't get for that subdivision, how is it affluent, is it not? You can't get crime data from that, unfortunately, but you can. Like CLR search has zip code crime data, which you got to be careful of, because some areas, like the crime might be on one side of the zip code and not the other. Ryan, you found
Trulia has a really good crime map tool for that. That'll show you, like I think it's based off of police report locations. So you can see like down to the street, down to the corner, and it'll show you like safest to worst. I also really like Neighborhood Scout. Neighborhood Scout will compare the neighborhood you're in to like the state as a whole. There's a private lender that reached out to me that was going to fund a particular deal, and the Neighborhood Scout report stated that there was something like a 90-something% chance of being a victim to property crime.
Good times.
Yeah, it was like, you probably don't want to fund this one. So that's another good tool, especially like if you're doing turnkey, you need to hang out on these sites.
Oh yeah, there's some. I think there's some good turnkey operators. You're not going to get a good deal. You're going to buy market or maybe a little above, but there are also some just absolute scam artists that you got to be careful of.
Yeah, in Indianapolis in particular, there's been a lot of issues with providers and fines and litigations and people losing even things like real estate licenses. So, if somebody's selling you a deal that looks great on paper, but is in a neighborhood that looks like it's a dumpster on fire, according to like crime data, demographic, probably not a sandbox you want to play in from out of state.
One quick point on out of state investors. 2 points. One, don't trust Google Maps or Google Earth by itself. Still pictures just don't tell you everything. Like you don't smell it. You don't see kind of like you don't see the litter flying along the breeze. It always looks a little bit better on Google Earth. Always go there. And secondly, if you are going to risk buying out of state, which I've seen a lot of people lose their shirt on, but I have seen it done right. Go one class of property better than you normally would. If you would be willing to accept a B- in where you live, don't accept anything less than a B out of state. That'd be my recommendation.
It's a great thought.
Yeah. And then the other one is school district. School district is really important. Greatschools.com or .org, I can't remember, is a really good site for that. Like, for example, Kansas City, they lost its accreditation a while back. They got it back, but they're still generally terrible schools. And parents don't want to send their kids there. And so, like, for example, and now if you're in a really affluent area of that, all the parents send their kids to private school, but you just need to know what the dynamics of that area are. But for example, between Raytown, Missouri and Kansas City, Missouri, there's an area that's in Kansas City, Missouri, but it's Raytown school districts. Now, Raytown has a middle of the road school district, but people, if they work for Kansas, like a firefighter or a police officer, work for the city or whatever, you have to live in Kansas City proper. And so a lot of people want to live in that little area because they can send their kids to a decent school district, but they can also meet the requirements of their job. And then one last thing, I mean, what we're always looking for, I love this graph. This is from the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. I'll pull this up right here. Pull that right there. The best deals tend to be not at the bottom of the market, but in sort of the lower middle for cash flow. If you're flipping, I think you want to be up here. In the middle class to upper middle class, maybe if you're doing luxury up here, but in the buy and hold, it's sort of, we look for working class to middle class and probably prefer lower middle class the most. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's all sorts of other things like that to look at. If you got an apartment complex that you're looking at, for example, you want to be on a main road or at least near it. That way you can put, sign, like we look at one apartment complex, 74 unit one. I just wrote an article that should be up on Biggerpockets about that. It's kind of off the beaten path, and that makes it much harder to advertise. I mean, you can go online, but you're not going to get any drive-by traffic. If you have an apartment that's C or D class, you really need to be close to a bus line. I mean, if you've got an A class property, I mean, nobody's using the buses, so it doesn't matter. But if you have a C or D, a lot of people, particularly D, a lot of people don't have cars. They need to be near a bus line. So if you're not near one, you are hurting really badly from that. There's all sorts of little things like this that you need to look for, just in terms of the area. So yeah, I'd break it, the value and financial estimate, I'd add the rent estimate to that, the area analysis, and the rehab estimate. And, with an apartment or big property, I'm going to do a more detailed estimate. I'm going to send, generally, I will send kind of my broad estimate along with my, like on an apartment, I'll send my broad estimate with the letter of intent. That way I have something to point to when I do my thorough due diligence. And, you know, I was like, I told you what I thought it was. If you knew it was different, you should have told me. And and then I can point to this, like, this is, you know, what we found is very different than what I thought. So we need a discount, or we, you know, and we can't come to terms, we walk away, or we decide we can still accept it. And I do that similar thing with houses. I mean, not if I'm dealing with like HUD, they don't care, you know, or Fannie or Mae or whatever, they don't care. That it's not going to help. But with like a homeowner, you know, I'll let them know what I think it's going to be, what the issues I see are, ask if there's anything I'm missing. And then when it comes back around, if I've got like, okay, you know, the house is infested with termites and it's about to fall over, you know, I'm going to mention that to them and show them inspection, things like that.
Sewer lines can be huge.
Oh,
putting, you know, in your other provisions that you're assuming the sewer line is in good working order and actually paying to have it scoped. I actually know quite a few investors that they make money on their retrades, because most of these, I mean, who else is doing that, right? Mm-hmm. So you get in and look, and there's tree roots in it, it's cracked. I mean, it can be very expensive if you haven't budgeted for it, but knowing that before you close is huge, as opposed to you get a 10 at least, and, you know, you get a sewage backup a couple of weeks later.
Oh yeah, early on we got killed with sewer lines. I think we had 3 different properties of sewer lines that were just collapsed, and we had to replace them all. They're usually like, you know, $5,000 a piece.
Yep.
And then finally we got wiser to it. We scoped the sewer line to begin with on this 4-plex, and it was collapsed. We got it scoped with snake and rooter, which is expensive. We scoped it, found it was collapsed. It was underneath the driveway, so it's expensive. I just asked for a bid at the time that's $13,000, which is too much for a sewer line, even underneath the sidewalk. And so we just sent that to the bank, and this was not Fannie, this is a local bank, and they just took it. And so we got $13,000 off of this 4-plex because we ended up just nostalgia for 2011 or 12, I think, when we bought this. $35,000 for a 4-plex in a decent suburb, Grandview, Missouri. It's like, I just can't imagine that these days. But yeah, I'd always get the sewer line scoped. They cost about $250. After you get it under contract, don't do it before. There's no point. But after you get it under contract, get a sewer line scoped. I would note you should go with the plumber, because they want the business of replacing the sewer line too. If you just see some roots in there, a little belly here, a little belly there, you know, snake it out and just go with it and just see if, you know, but don't replace it just because, oh, you should replace it, there's some roots in there. You want to like large bellies or outright collapses or roots just every single connection.
So this is a good point on inspection, guys, to be aware of. They're paid to find stuff, right? If you pay somebody to do an inspection and they don't find anything, you feel like you've wasted your money, which is why if you've ever done a retail flip, they come back with the dumbest stuff. Like literally, like this isn't ever gonna matter. So, you know, keep that in mind, that if you're hiring somebody, it's best to have somebody who understands what you're doing, who's like, you can really kind of trust their recommendation on. But, you know, just know you go through and do a full blown inspection. They're paid to find stuff. We just had one done on a 12 unit that came back with 44 freaking pages worth of inspection notes. And it's literally like, oh yeah, the building's fine. The units are fine. There's like, it could have been a 1 or 2 pager, but we paid the guy, you know, a couple grand. So he wanted it to look like we got our money's worth. So just keep that in mind. Take what you get from inspectors with a grain of salt.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's and a lot of times they'll mention things like, let me pull up this one example here. Like this is literally from an inspection report. And so, you know, this is minor siding rot note in the front house and paint peeling. You know, so that's a little minor problem. I can barely see it there. You know, you might want to touch it up, but that's nothing to really be concerned about. You definitely want to touch up this part on the top, there. But it's really, you know, pretty minor. You don't have to fix up every little thing. On the other hand, this one right here, you know, open splice above door needs to be placed in a junction box. Yeah, you want to place that in a junction box. So you want to look through these carefully. It's not something you have to follow exactly. You want to look for the big ticket items and the ones that are obviously safety risks or anything like that. And then you want to touch up and fix everything that needs to be done. But they are looking to find things. So it's not something where you absolutely have to do every little thing you have there. And when you have those retail flips, don't be afraid to, start crossing off a few items. It's part of the negotiation. You're not, at the beck and call of these sellers. I would say, I guess when we walk through the property, so now we have it under contract. Let's say we've negotiated it and we've walked in and we have it under contract. I get together a much larger list. And so this is a 6-page sheet we have together. And again, I'm happy to share this, but you don't have to do it exactly as we do. It's just, but you should have a consistent process, and I use consistent documentation too. So let me share this one as well. Okay, so it looks like this. We have the lot, the exterior of the house, and then any other exterior comments, and that's 1 page. And then it goes, the general interior, and the garage, the basement, and then we just go by each room. We got the mechanical, the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the second bathroom, if there's a third bathroom, laundry room, bedroom, and then anything else. And so it's just like, and we have all the key, basic items on there, like for the bathroom, we have the door and the stopper, the light fixture, the vent fan, the windows, blind screen. And some of them I just cross off. Some of them we say, if it's good, we check it. If it's bad, we put, if it's good, we put the check. If it's bad, we put the X. We make a little comment. And then we transition it into a scope of work that looks like this. So it looks like, so we use a program called Smartsheet, which is like kind of Excel on steroids. We can even attach pictures to each of these line items. And then I put estimates for each of, so we break it down by, we have the lot, the exterior, dining room, kitchen. And then I break it into basically 5 stages. The pre-construction, which is stuff that has to be done in order for construction to begin. So that would be like, okay, the power doesn't work because all the copper was stripped out of the basement. Okay, so we need to rewire the house first before anything has happened. We've got to, or the plumbing is all been stolen. We got to replace that. Or we got to do a demo, or we got to get some permit, or whatever you need to do to get the work started. That's pre-construction. Then I have the construction work, and this could be broken up into 2. Like if you do have subcontractors do everything, you might want to break this up differently. But we usually have a general contractor or a handyman or our own staff do most of the construction work, and we call that the construction stage, and we break it up by room. And then we have a vendors list, and the vendors list is anyone who's doing something other than the main contractor on the project. So we have, we don't have our contractors do flooring, so we'll have that in the vendors list. Sometimes we don't have them do painting. Sometimes we have them do painting. Sometimes we don't. So we'll put painting in there, HVAC, tree trimming, refinishing the hardwoods, all sorts of things. You're placing the sewer lines, all sorts of stuff like that. And then finally, we have the punch out, which is stuff you have to do after the project has been completed, or after the construction, after like the flooring's in, the paint's done, all that stuff. The little knickknacks, putting the outlet covers on, putting the blinds in, installing the appliances, those, and then the final cleaning. And so all of those items, and we break it down into those 5 lists: pre-construction, construction, vendors, and then, did I say 5? Did I say 5? I think I'm at 4. Pre-construction, construction, vendors, punch out, and 5 if you include cleaning. And so now again, you might do it differently. You might have subcontractors do you have this subcontractor do the drywall, and this subcontractor do the painting, and just based it on lots and lots of subcontractors, you probably save a little bit of money, but a lot more coordination. Or you might have one contractor do every single thing, so that way you don't need to break it out this way. But however you do it, we like to break it out like this. My brother has done these, and he usually puts the punch out in the construction list, like kind of each room. So separate, like living room, construction, like a header, punch out, and the punch out items, then switch on to the next one. So there's a lot of variation of how you want to do it, but you want to do it the same way each time. And you want to do it kind of within this broad framework.
I will say one of the biggest, mind blown things I learned from Andrew is the power of writing your own scopes of work. You'll learn if you're newer, or even if you've done this for a while, a term like rent ready means very different things to very different people. So you go through and have a GC and say, hey, I want this rent ready, and explain kind of what that looks like. They may come back with a bid. And I mean, I kid you not, we had one of these that they were like, oh, we didn't know you wanted doors on the closets. Oh, we didn't know you wanted, light fixtures.
You are so unreasonable, Ryan.
I'm just insane. But going through and actually using a sheet like this to flag out, hey, this is what we want done per room, is going to get you a lot better bids, but it's also going to help you honestly shop a lot more competitively. If you get 2 bids and you notice, hey, one guy is charging you, twice as much for bedrooms and bathrooms, but everything else is cheaper. Well, maybe he doesn't really want to do kitchens and bathrooms. So I definitely recommend, even if it's just flagging what's wrong and passing it off and saying, hey, I want this stuff fixed, you can let them write up the bid if you're using GCs, but writing your own scopes gives you a ton of freedom.
Amen. And I would add to that, one of the key things it does is it lets you compare bids much more easily. Because, we've in the past, I just tell, and I've never had a contractor have a problem with this. I always tell contractors, I want you to use my scope to put your bid together. I don't want you to use yours. I don't want to use whatever weird program you bought. You're going to use mine. And that way I can just directly, we just literally post in their bids on these items, and we just compare them right next to each other. I've had in the past, looking at contractors will group things together, and then some will drop items that, no, we don't do this, we don't do that. And I can't tell really which one is better or what they're really bidding. And I've had issues where I thought, particularly on that one apartment that had the shooting I mentioned that happened a week after we finished selling it. Not our tenant, by the way. It was not our tenant who did the shooting, but it was I got this bid for major, for repairing all the units and the exterior, and there were some key items that I thought were in it that weren't. And it's like, this bid was like 20 pages long, and I just missed it. But I wouldn't miss it if it was on my sheet. So always use your sheet. Always demand they use your sheet. Always ask for itemized bids, and especially early on, if you don't have a relationship, get several bids too. Compare them to each other. It also gives you a lot of comfort because you're not getting ripped off. You only get one, and if you get 3 and they're all kind of similar, then you kind of know you're dealing with it. And always ask for references from contractors if you haven't used them before. I know I'm just throwing tips at you left and right, but
Andrew, do we have a sample contractor agreement that you can share? I know with us, they're required to give us proof of insurance, workman's comp, W-9 before anything starts. But do you have an agreement that you can share?
We do. Let me see here. We put this together after we started. Like we were late on this, and so we haven't gotten all. We need to get people to sign it, but it looks like this. Let me share this. So we kind of have the key information on the first page. Who you are and whatnot, and then all sorts of different items. Basically we're saying you're an independent contractor, you're not an employee. This contract only basically lasts until there's no more. We don't have any more work for you. Basic responsibilities. You set your own hours. You provide your materials unless stated otherwise. You get building permits if they're required. If you're working with lead-based paint, if you're painting lead-based paint, you have that certification, which is a bit tricky.
We'll go through at the end, guys. I'll have Andrew send these to me, and we'll upload them into a Dropbox or a Google Drive that if you guys want a link to, just shoot me a message through Facebook, and we'll link to that stuff for you guys.
And then in here somewhere, I can't remember exactly where I have it. The one thing I would note is regarding lien releases, and we like to do it where the lien release, if you accept the final check, that acts as a lien release, and that's stated in here. I can't remember where it is, and so that way you don't have to get a separate lien release on each one, because lien releases can suck. I think it'd be good to go over a couple kind of consistent items that we've seen a lot that you should look for, both in the initial inspection and also when you're doing a thorough scope of work, that are really important to look for and can really cost a lot of money if you have problems with it. So I guess I'll just, unless there's something more you want to jump in on there with that, Ryan.
No, that's good.
Okay, we'll start key items to look for. The first one I would say is a fuse box. If you ever see one of these things, they are old and antiquated and generally need to be replaced with an electrical panel. It's usually not that hard to replace them with electrical panel. It costs you probably between 800 and $1,000. But these things they're just not up to snuff. And several electrical panels are also not up to snuff. The most noteworthy one, which I usually only see in apartments, is a Federal Pacific panel, which either look like this, and it says, if you can, oops, zoom in on this. Where's the zoom here?
If you go straight above the image, go up. There you go to the left. There you go.
Yeah, boom. Okay. You can see that Federal Pacific, if you can see that. Sometimes, though, it's kind of harder to tell. For example, this one right here is a Federal Pacific, and it doesn't really look like it. But if you look really closely right there, Federal Pacific Electric Company. And
so I haven't ran into these. So what's wrong with the Federal Pacific stuff?
What's wrong with them is pretty simple. Basically, an electric panel is supposed to trip when you have an overload of electricity. So if you get too much electricity going through, one particular breaker, that could be a fire hazard. So it trips and it just turns the power off. FPA panels don't do that. They just let the power go right through. They don't trip. And so if you have an overload, it's just going to go right through, and they're a major fire hazard. And so they are, I don't know what they did wrong. I think they were put in generally in the 70s and 80s or thereabout. I can't remember exactly. Usually I've only seen them in apartment complexes. That doesn't mean there aren't any in houses, but they are basically garbage. So if you see an FB panel, and an inspector should always find these too. And I always, for us, we do rapid fire, when we're doing rapid fire investing, we don't necessarily get an inspection on every property since I've been through so many, but every new investor and any investor who's only buying, one every couple of months or less, should always get an inspection. An inspector should always find these.
Well, and at the very minimum, guys, I mean, have the GC, like with us, we've got one main GC that we really work with. Have them walk it with you, because they're gonna notice and point things out that you're not gonna see. Andrew, real quick on your fuse boxes. Yeah. So in Indianapolis, most of our fuse box panels end up being knob and tube wiring or aluminum. So obviously that's going to cost me more than $800, right?
Yes. Here's knob and tube wiring. And so knob and tube wiring is what they used to have back in the day. This is usually in older buildings, like pre-1940, I think, pre-World War II. And you see these, you can see them, these nice little tubes and the wiring. Very simple sounding. Anyway, they are also a fire hazard. Whenever you have knob and tube in an open basement, I would always replace it. That being said, knob and tube can be tricky because sometimes you don't have an open basement. And in those cases, usually it's knob and tube wiring works. It's a fire hazard, but it's not a fire certainty by any means. It's not like you have knob and tubes, so the house is going to burn down. Most of these houses are all old, so they've all survived for this long. So
Brad Pickett, who used to be a firefighter, says firefighters love those.
They keep them busy. Yeah, but I would always replace it if you can. But but it's not always easy to do. It's not, you don't want to open up all the walls in the house just because it has knob and tube. I would not say knob and tube is a non-starter. I don't want to see it. If I see it, I'm not happy. But it's not like a fuse box I'm going to replace because it's simple. It's right there. Knob and tube I'm going to replace if I can, but I can't always do it with it economically, and the house might still make sense. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, Ryan, but that's kind of how I've looked at knob and tube.
I think on most of what we own that had it, it had been abandoned before we bought it. But yeah, as a couple other guys pointed out, you can run into issues with insurance.
It can, yeah. There are, insure like Affinity, or I think they changed the name to REI Guard. I've had no problem with them insuring knob and tube. We switched from them to another company. We got a quantity discount, and they made us, with every knob and tube one, we have a higher deductible with those. So we have probably 5 to 10% of our portfolio, probably more like 5% has knob and tube. So those houses have a higher deductible. And that you might have issues with that. Affinity didn't have any problems. They're kind of the rapid fire, slightly more expensive, but rapid fire investor packages for insurance. State Farm is probably, and farmers and whatnot, they're probably going to be like, nah. But at the same time, it's just something. But even if you go through with it, like let's say, like, okay, I'm not going to replace all the knob and tube because it's all over the place. It's a fire, and it's just there's no way to do this economically. But the house still makes sense. Well, you can say, hey, you got to give me a discount. So because it's got knob and tube, maybe you're not going to replace it. But yeah, it's knob and tube is a tricky one because it's awful to see it. We've asked retrades on it. It's contributed to us backing out of deals before. I don't think we've ever done it solely because of knob and tube. And we've replaced a lot of it, but at the same time, when it goes into, it's hard to replace all of it because if you're completely rewiring a house, that means you're pretty much ripping out all the drywall.
Darren's got a good point. If you're flipping, it's a bigger issue because that's going to scare away potential buyers.
We're buying hold investors. So, flipping is certainly with flipping too, you're more likely to do a very large,
rehab.
And if you're ever opening the walls and there's not to get rid of that stuff, it's like the only reason not to get rid of it is if you're not opening the walls.
You guys ever seen like where they cut like channels in the drywall where like it was to like rerun it? We see that on a lot of like really low end hoodie stuff. Yeah, I would also say if you're going direct to seller like we are for the vast majority of our deals, most of these owners don't know what they have. So a lot of them will say, oh yeah, no, the knob and tube has been abandoned. We had it rewired. And then, simple electrical tester up to it tells you, no, that's still hot. So that can be a really good kind of one of those ways to kind of justify a substantial price discount of, hey, you've got hot wire that you didn't even know was still active.
I mean, another issue kind of like that is grounding. And pretty much everything that you find before 1970 probably is not grounded. And it's like, that's not good either. But it's like, again, do you want to rewire the whole house? I mean, it's like enormous numbers of houses. I mean, of course, if you're buying something new, if you're a developer, you better ground it. But if you're, rewiring and putting a ground wire throughout the entire house is not as easy a thing to do. Now, you might want to do it for, say, because if you don't have a ground wire, a GFCI outlet is useless. So GFCIs are in the kitchens and the bathrooms and near water because they need to turn off in an instant because otherwise you can get electrocuted. They don't work without a ground wire. So it might be worth grounding those, but not the rest of the house. So there's a lot of, there's no perfect answer, unfortunately, to this stuff. If you got a Section 8 tenant, Section 8 rentals, they demand that the property be grounded. They have a lot of weird things that have to be there. They can't be peeling paint on. Well, I'm not weird, but they have some requirements.
No lead paint chips.
Yeah, no lead paint chips. But there are also some requirements that you think they would have, but they don't. And so it's like, but you just need to know that going in and kind of decide whether or not this is something you're willing to tolerate. Because especially with old houses, they are not going to be perfect, and you can't expect them to be perfect. And the amount of money required to get them up to nowadays standards, unless it's in a really nice area that's gentrified and all the rest of that, it usually doesn't make sense to buy. Are you willing to just say, I'm not interested in anything built before 1980? I mean, I know investors who are like that.
Yep,
that's
the option. I mean, it's a risk tolerance thing. This is investing.
Yeah, you want to make it as safe as possible. That's very important. But, if we spent everything on safety, the economy would just grind to a halt, and it'd actually be counterproductive in that regard as well. I should note one more thing with regards to panels is the Pushmatic panel, which looks like this. These are not good, but they are, from my experience, better than Federal Pacific. They work, they just don't work very well. At least that's my experience and what I've understood. I'd be interested to see what other people think about it in the comments. I would generally want to replace these, but I don't think with FPE, it's mandatory. With Pushmatics, I'd say it's preferable. This is a smaller Pushmatic. But yeah, I would be interested to know what other investors do with regards to Pushmatics. We try to replace them, but I don't think it's quite as urgent to do so as it is with Federal Pacifics. Then I guess some other items to look for would be mold. Unless there are any other questions on regards to electrical panels, because the electrical panels, because usually you don't have to spend that much on electrical, but when you do, you have to spend a lot. So it's one of the key things to to keep in mind. But yeah, I'll
we just got hit with a $20,000 change order on an apartment complex due to some electrical stuff. So, do what?
Those blow up your budget pretty good, don't they?
Yeah. That I think our total rehab was what, 75? Well, now it's higher than that. We'd budgeted like 75, 80 grand, and 20,000 obviously bumped that number a little bit.
Yeah, that tends to do that. Mold is, I think you've all seen molds.
Andrew, real quick, 1,400 square foot house has knob and tube. What would be the cost to replace, rewire? 12 grand. Is that a fair estimate?
Is that the whole house with the drywall open?
Brad, drywall open or closed?
I'd say about that. We rewired a smaller house for about 10. It was a while ago. So 12, 13, 14, probably around there. I think that's a fair estimate. It's been a while since we've rewired an entire house. No, we did one. We did one recently that was smaller, and it was just, I think it was about 8,000. And so yeah, it was about 850 square feet. So yeah, I think that'd be about right. And it varies on certain things. If they got to go to the crawl space, if there's that's going to be more expensive. If they got to tear out all the walls, it's going to be more expensive.
Keep in mind markets too. Andrew's in Kansas City.
More expensive than Kansas City.
Yep, I'm in Indianapolis, so some markets it's just naturally going to be more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with mold, and you can kind of see this is basement. First of all, whenever you're in a finished basement, and I used to see this right after the crash, it was like everybody was refinancing their house and finishing their basement. It was like the national pastime, and it was a awful national pastime. It was very, very stupid because most of these houses were foreclosed homes. But also you see things, but also basements are notorious for getting water in them. And if you're going to finish your basement, you need to make sure that water is not getting in it, or get rid of any drywall. If you like, we like to do these kind of pseudo finished basements where we paint the walls white and the floor like this gray with oil-based paint so it doesn't chip off when people are walking on it, and try to, if we can, paint the ceilings white. Sometimes it's just rafters, you can't do that. And so it kind of gives us this semi-finished look. But if they're putting drywall down there and carpet, the carpet will get, musty, get wet, and then it'll get musty and have the stink you can't get out of it. And then you'll have, this mold on the wall. And mold is not hard to get rid of. You just tear it. If it's just a little bit, you can put kills on it and get rid of it. If there's a lot, you can just tear out that drywall and you're good to go. The problem is getting rid of the source of the water, because mold grows in areas where there's darkness and water. Moisture and water, or moisture and darkness, that means mold. And most mold isn't toxic, but every single tenant will assume without question that this mold is causing their children to get, the Black Death or something. And so if you have mold, you need to find the source of the water. It's usually the plumbing leak, water coming from the outside, or roof leak. Those are the three most common. And if it's in the basement, it can be extremely difficult to get that water to stop coming in. We never guarantee that basements won't get water in them, especially during floods. We will say explicitly during lease signing, we do not guarantee that this basement will stay dry.
High water table can be an issue too, because the water's not coming down; it's coming up. Our office floods about once a year here in Indianapolis, and there's literally a geyser that comes up in one corner of our basement, and happens maybe once a year. We run sub pumps and a dehumidifier and call it good, but it's one of those things. We just know the area we're in. If you have a basement, it floods. So naturally, we didn't put drywall in it.
And sump pumps are a good thing to add, but at the same time, a sump pump is going to get rid of the water when it comes in. So it's like it often, or if it's below, if it's coming up. So a sump pump is not enough if you're going to finish the basement. It's definitely enough if you aren't going to finish the basement. You don't want it to be wet, but you want to tell people, like, if you're going to put stuff down here, put it on what are those stupid boxes?
Like pallets or something.
Pallets or something like that. But and if you see something like this, let me show you this picture. This always means the same thing. So you see, I'm sorry, it's a little baby, where they cut off the drywall about halfway up in the basement here. That means they had mold and they cut it off. It always means the same thing. And so that, you just tell you that basement gets water in it. And as far as ceiling basements, Like oftentimes you have to dig on the outside of the basement. So you got to dig from the outside of the house and seal it from the outside. Like you just can't quite seal it because it's coming up between, like here's the basement floor, the slab, and here's the basement wall, and it's coming up right in here between them. And you can't, and for some reason, you just can't seal it nearly as well from the inside. You got to seal it from the outside, and that is not cheap, in case you're wondering. So, one, I would say generally you don't want to finish basements. I like the pseudo finished basement. Like for example, appraisals in Kansas City, they give you, they don't add any square footage for basements. Even if it's a split level house where you walk in and go up or down, and half the basement is half, it's like only like 2 feet underground, and you can still see outside. They'll still count it as finished space, and they just put finished basement and give you like $5,000 for it. It's pathetic. And so I like the pseudo finished basement because they'll give you that, and I'm much more interested in possibly adding the basement if it's a walkout, like if it's like where in the front side of the house it's underground, but the back side of the house you can walk out into the backyard because it's like a raised ranch. That wouldn't make me interested. But if it's all underground, yeah, don't waste your time, don't waste your money. And if it's already there, I would only keep it if there's very good sun, if you have a strong reason to believe that you're not getting water in, because you usually will destroy that stuff.
We try to look at anything we have under contract. We try to go out and look at after a good heavy rain. Because a lot of the times, they're going to call you out when it's been dry for 3 weeks if they know they've got a water problem. My wife and I, the house we bought, the seller actually on their disclosure had no water problems. First day we bought the house, we had water actually flooding in through like the air vents of our crawl space into under our house. It was a great welcome to the lovely state of Indiana. We got down in the crawl space and there was parts to like 5 or 10 pumps. So they knew they had a water problem. We just hadn't been there on a day when it was wet. Brad, can you talk a little bit about acquisitions? You want me or Andrew to take that?
You're probably better on that one. You want to go into acquisitions? Should we maybe get through the due diligence first here?
Yeah, that's fine. We'll circle back to that at the end.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Because there's probably three more items I want to talk about that are key to look for. Actually, 4. I'll look at one. But the first one is galvanized plumbing. Galvanized plumbing, am I shared or not? I didn't share. Okay. So this is what galvanized plumbing looks like. And this right here is galvanized plumbing. This is copper. And anything touching galvanized or anything touching copper, that any sort of metal touching copper, if it doesn't have a specific connector, will rust. It's just, and so that's always a bad sign. But galvanized rusts in itself. It's here's a good picture I found on the internet of the inside of a galvanized pipe, and if you can see, you're not going to get much water pressure from that,
and it's going to come out brown.
Yeah, it's going to do that. Galvanized plumbing is very common pre 1950s and earlier, I say. Then they started, maybe 1940s and earlier. They switched to copper. Copper's great, except for certain people who have an affinity for a particular drug that rhymes with Beth tend to like to steal it, which is not fun. And then they switched to this white, hard plastic called CPVC, which is not. It really breaks when it gets cold a lot. And then they switched to PEX, which is like this flexible plastic. I can pull up an image of that real quick.
A lot of the time it's color coded red if it's hot.
Usually red or blue. I think most of you have probably seen it, but all. And PEX is like the greatest thing ever. Like that's PEX plumbing right there. And this stuff is flexible. You can bend it around. It rarely breaks when it gets cold. Copper breaks often when it gets cold. But galvanized plumbing in particular is awful because it rusts and we'll keep it if it's okay. But the big thing is to check the water pressure. Are you getting decent water pressure? If you're not getting much water pressure and you have galvanized plumbing, it always means the same thing. It's rusted. And if you can see the rust on the outside of it, you need to replace that and get some good old PEX in there. So always look for galvanized plumbing, especially on older homes. The next thing is the roof, and I'll give you a couple pictures. You can see with this one here, this is the house we bought where the roof was terrible. You can see particularly over here, let me just get this picture, that you can see this sort of sogginess. They start to lip up the different, especially I just call them, they're lipping. So it's like if the roof tiles are kind of like peeling up like this on the edges, that means it's nearing the end of its useful life. And also, if you look on the side of the house, you can see how many layers. You don't want to see more than one. If there's 2, that's bad. If there's 3, that's really bad. Not only does 3 mean you need to replace it, and also there could be damage to the decking, which is what's underneath the roof tiles, the shingles. But because that means, because there's so much weight on it, that it's probably damaged those 2. And it's against some codes, particularly older codes, allow you to have 2 layers of roof. Nowadays it's always 1, and so if they have 3 layers, that roof is shot, and it's going to cost more to get rid of it, so you need to know that too. And the other thing to look for is hail damage, and hail damage doesn't usually kill a roof. Let me go back to this. So this is a picture of hail damage. It doesn't usually kill a roof. You can see these like little like indentations, like it looks like it's almost been like it's gotten it's gotten burnt or something, or little they're just impact craters basically.
Can you share your picture of it?
Oh, am I not sharing? Okay, sorry. There it is.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, and so you see these little impact craters like right here and here. And now hail damage doesn't kill a roof. It might, but it usually doesn't. But what it does do is you can often get insurance claims on it, and that's fun. you just know this roof doesn't have as much life left on it. It's not going to last as long. That damage right there might take 5 years off of it. So, unless you can get an insurance claim, this kind of damage is not going to get me to replace that roof right off the bat. I usually like to ride our systems until they break, and then we fix them afterwards. But at the same time, you got to know that means that roof doesn't have as much life left on it. And when you're analyzing a property, a lot of times you'll see like this furnace works, but it's old. It's one of those green ones. I need to, I'm not going to replace it right now. We have this category, I actually hate the name, we call it FAIR, future anticipated rehab expenses. And it's like this, we often use it when we inherit a tenant. We buy a property that has a tenant and it needs a lot of work, but the tenant's living there, it's under rented, and maybe we're going to let them live there for the rest of their lease, and then we'll go from there. We know that we need to spend $20,000 rehabbing that property in the future, but it's not now. So we know that we need to account for that. If you have a roof that's got 2 years left on it, if you've got a furnace that's got maybe a year, you don't need to replace it during your rehab, but you need to account for that. It's a big difference to have a brand new HVAC system versus a system that's barely getting by. The next thing I think I would go into termite damage, and I'll also talk about briefly dry rot. Dry rot is just water damage. Oftentimes you'll see it if there's a leak in the around the toilet. I like to step around a toilet or tub to see if the floor is soft, which means that there's a leak there and that you need to replace some of the subfloor. You might see it on the exterior, especially if the paint is peeled off and whatnot. It is just soft wood that needs to be replaced. Termites, on the other hand, and also carpet ants, but termites in particular are awful. So this, you can see, this is a joist, and this is what termites can do to that, and they can just just really destroy that. We need to probably replace this, and the best way to do that is just sister the joist and put a new joist in there and just kind of nail it to that and the subfloor as well. And one of the best, sometimes it's tough to see this. You can always get a termite inspection. It's an addition to your, that doesn't come with the standard inspection. It's an add-on. And I cannot remember how much they generally cost off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
We carry pocket knives on us when we're walking these. And if you take a knife and kind of poke it at it, if the tip just collapses into it, that's a good sign that you've got some termite, or at the very minimum, some issues.
Yeah. You can see mud tunnels are a thing to look for. If you can see this kind of coloration. Let me Google some good mud tunnels. Mud tunnels, termites. So let's get a good image here. So yeah, something like
we can't see it.
No, I know. I'm looking for a good one here. Let's see. This is not a bad one right here. This is pretty. This is this is really close. You can these are what the termites travel through when they're eating the wood. So you can see that's really close in on. There's the hardwood right there. But this is one that's looking at a wall. But you can see these things throughout. And whenever I see something like this one, I kind of go around tapping on the walls. Is it soft? And sometimes it'll just punch right through. and you're trying to get an idea of how much damage. If you see these, you absolutely need to get a termite inspection, and you definitely want to request money off of the deal, if not just backing out entirely. Because termites can be really expensive. If they can be really cheap if they have very isolated damage and you just need to replace this one spot and get a termite treatment. Termite treatment's not that much, a couple $100. But if they've done significant, I mean, we have, I've been in houses where we thought like this thing's like all the exterior walls were just like gutted, like, and the thing is going to collapse, and you pretty much have to replace the house, and it just kills the deal. You can't do those types of properties. So termites, I think, are something to very carefully look out for. I mean, there's all sorts of other things, lead paint, which is usually tolerable as long as you're not making big changes, or you just got to pay more for a lead-based certified painter to paint it or replace the windows or stuff like that. I mean, some of it's a lot of, risk aversion. And if you're going to want to buy the newer properties without these problems, it's just going to cost you more. It's going to be harder to get those cash flow units. But if you're going to go to flipping, it's probably best to focus a little bit more so on those. I mean, there's all sorts of other ones we want to go through. I don't know if there's any particular ones you want to talk about, Ryan, or if anybody in the forum wants to mention something. I'd be happy to go over those. But there's, those are some key items that I look for when I'm walking the property.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on most of the big stuff that we're looking for. Let's see, septic and wells.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Scoping a unit scoping this sewer line will tell you if there's a septic tank, and then you can get a septic inspection. Septic, if you have a shot septic tank in the city, you're going to have an issue with, they won't let you replace it often, and you have to tie in the sewer. And not only is that expensive, but they will have a fee for like a load
tap fee.
Yeah, and those are. I mean, we did that once. It was $10,000.
We're waiting on one right now. What's our tap fee in Franklin, Noah?
The water is going to be like 2 to 3, and then sewer another.
Yeah, we're at like 6 to 7 to do water and sewer on one. But we're also at the mercy of the city of when they get to it. So yeah, they gave us like you think like the cable guys rough, they gave us a week range of when they'll be there. So that's a lot of fun. Darren, I'd say for the most part, when it comes to rentals, I'm in Indianapolis, you're out here too. For the most part, everything we're buying is on city utilities. It's easier, it's less risk, it's one more thing you don't have to maintain. The one we've got, I think, 2 properties that are on it, and one of them connections are already there. We're tapping in. We planned on that when we bought the property. The other one, it runs to like everything but our street, so we're planning on tapping into it sometime in the next couple of years. Tim, AC units. What do you there?
I mean, there's the general one is the AC compressor on the exterior, and you can usually just tell that by what it looks like. If it's those boxes, those are pretty old.
Yeah, if it's like the size of a microwave, you're probably going to need to replace it.
Yeah, if it's rusted, or at least that you don't have a lot of time. One of the things, it's hard to test an AC unit in a furnace in the wrong side of the year. If it's in the middle of the winter, it's hard to test the AC unit. You can see if it blows, if it works, and whatnot, but you can't really test to see if it really.
It's one of the funnest part of owning units and the seasons changing.
Yeah,
what's not going to work?
And that's one reason I have the contingencies. Like even things that work right off the bat, often you test them, it works, but then when they have a load, they break. And so like we tell any tenant that for a new that's moving into a property, we just rehab. Like, we just rehab this. There's probably a few things that will break. Just call us, we'll get them out there and we'll fix it. But you gotta assume, and then we capitalize that as a part of the rehab. But you gotta include that in your rehab, assessment. How much did it actually cost? And so you turn on a faucet, it works. Oh, it's great. And then, they actually start living there for a week and then it breaks. So
Shannon, repairs or upgrades you recommend to reduce maintenance in the future? So I actually got this from a guy named Tim Bratz that some of you may be familiar with. He calls it hardening. So this is something we've started to do on all of our rentals. So we're no longer giving them ceiling fans. We're going with can lighting, vinyl plank flooring, granite countertops. Big part of it is, first off, it's a lot more robust. It's going to last a lot longer. But the other piece to it too is you're not going to have somebody who's used to granite can lighting and vinyl plank flooring leave your place to go back somewhere with carpet and, you know, budget Home Depot countertops. So you're going to get people to stick around longer, but it's also going to last longer. So, you know, ideally that's going to make it easier to handle turns and things.
Yeah, and I'd say there's a temptation to use cheap materials that you should avoid, which is basically reiterating what Ryan's point is. If you can, like, using like vinyl planks instead of carpet is good, but if you're going to use carpet, don't use builder's grade. You know, go a little bit higher than that.
Don't do like the 80s church carpet.
Yeah, don't use
or
flat
like,
ever. Like, you draw, just take a pen and, like, if you have a house with flat paint, take a pen and just make a mark on it and try to get that mark off. It's like impossible. It's really shocking. I didn't even know this until probably 10 years ago, but flat paint is horrible and should not exist. And so, yeah, always make sure you get some sheen to it.
Tim, why no ceiling fans? I don't know if you ever had a ceiling fan as a kid.
Ceiling fans in. I'm interested in why you don't.
Yeah, so I don't know if you ever had a ceiling fan as a kid, but we swung from ours. We launched stuff off of them. We tried to see whose Lego guy would stick to it the longest. I mean, it's one of those things, like, me personally, I think they're nice. So initially I was putting them into everything, but you're going to run into people hanging on them, people breaking them. They get just dirty and nasty. Nobody dusts a ceiling fan.
That's a good point.
So yeah, it's, you know, I personally think if you have overhead lighting, again, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of your competition, and doing some of these things are going to let you charge a premium.
Yeah.
I'll be blunt. Like, most of our units are technically over fair market rent by as much as $150. We'll throw it out there and just let the market decide. We'll look at comps and we'll say, hey, this unit looks like it can get 800. We'll plan our purchase off of that. We'll get done though and throw it out at 950. And it's very, very rare that we're not getting the price we're asking for our units.
And I'd say we have something similar as well. And that kind of made me think, we generally speaking we don't remove them if they're already there, but we don't add storm doors, because Kansas City is windy, in case you're wondering. And my old house had a storm door, and if I didn't completely shut that, the wind would catch it and just rock it over and just rip, you know, it just basically constantly having to repair it. And tenants don't tend to be that kind of these things. So we never add storm doors. We will leave them there if they're there in good shape, but we don't add them. But yeah, all sorts of little things like that, you know, not cutting corners, making sure that, the little, with regards to rentals, we've always, our thing is like, everything needs to be decent and functional. It doesn't need to be great. We're not flipping houses. If you're flipping, it needs to shine. But like, we don't want to leave like little marks here, little holes there, all sorts of stuff like that, that a lot of landlords leave because it's like, oh, well, it's 95% there. We want it to be 100% there. And like finishing all those things and using decent materials and decent contractors. Don't be top of the end. We just use Formica countertops, but we're not, at the same time, and standard appliances from like Home Depot or Lowe's or Factory Direct. But we want it all to work and all to be there, and all to be, materials that aren't going to break the first time. My brother has this kind of rule of thumb he uses: never buy the cheapest. He always buys the second cheapest. So it's like Home Depot, they have the hammers, and he'll buy the cheapest is like this wooden handle, and the hammer, it looks like it's just going to fall off on the fifth time. The second cheapest is, it's all connected, strong and whatnot. I would say probably go a little bit higher than that. Don't go for the second cheapest, but you want to be, if you're going rentals, kind of in the lower middle, but always above the bottom. And if you're going to be in the flipping, you want to be closer to the top. But I think there is a temptation to use the cheapest contractor and the cheapest materials to keep your costs down, and it'll cost you more in the end. And almost every investor I know has made this mistake and learned from it in the exact same way. So if you're getting started, just skip that learning part and go right to the point where you know what you're doing.
If you're going direct to seller, it's just a matter of a slightly better deal that you're negotiating, right? We're not necessarily talking a $20,000 difference in price. You'd be surprised how far something like $5,000 goes on finishing touches. Something else we do on all of our properties is we put in dishwashers. I know a lot of landlords hate them. A lot of them don't like them. But today's day and age, the quality of resident you're going to get is significantly higher if they have a dishwasher. If they don't have a dishwasher, then you're going to not be able to command a premium by any means.
Absolutely, we do the same whenever we can. And on the opposite side, we usually don't install garbage disposals. If they're there, we'll leave them. But I've heard wildly different takes from different landlords on the effectiveness of garbage disposals. And I think more often than not, I've heard that they're not worth it. They generally just get clogged up more often than they actually do something good, especially with the way tenants treat them. And so I wouldn't install garbage disposals. I wouldn't replace them if they're functional, if they're there. So, always make sure you have, this is generally there. Make sure you have shut off valves for all of your, installed for in your bathroom, your kitchen and whatnot. Make sure that that nothing leaks, check every single one of your faucets and whatnot. You can go to the water meter and just look at it. And if it's spinning or even slowly when you're looking at it, that means there's a leak somewhere. But those
Could
things
just be a running toilet, but something
something's going wrong. Make sure you find it. And if there's those little things can really add up. And one break here, one maintenance request is going to cost more than just doing it when you're there. So using those, spending a little bit more materials on contractors and making sure you fix everything that's wrong and not leaving anything to chance will save you money in the long run and get you better tenants and get you better profits on your flips too.
We just did a 12-month review on our first Burr deal that at this point has been leased for 12 months. And we had $124 in unexpected maintenance. I'm not upset about that, but we did a good rehab going into it.
That's not bad for a new Burr deal at all.
No.
Generally, it can be well over $1,000, especially if you have that furnace that's on the edge and then it goes out. So that can really kill you. But I mean, not if you're planning on it, which is one of the reasons that due diligence is so important. And even though it's not particularly fun or
not the sexiest topic I've ever spoke on,
but it's important and it's overlooked. And I would say it's the area that most people get burned on. That's the biggest mistake people make in real estate is bad due diligence or insecurity.
You talk to any seasoned investor who has any sort of portfolio, and they're gonna have a deal that they'll tell you, oh yeah, I shouldn't have bought that one. The important thing is to learn from that one and not repeat it.
Absolutely. Amen.
Anybody else have any other questions as we're kind of winding down here? All right, Brad, I know you wanted to chat quickly about acquisitions. What questions did you have there?
Yeah, I got one thing. You're a little bit of static coming from your side, Ryan. I'm not sure if that's I mean, it's still coming through. It's just a little.
Okay. We'll look into it for the next one.
Yeah.
Tim, what are some of the intangibles that separate the good investors from great investors? I think that depends on your definition of good and great. I know for me personally, I'm more interested in building a sustainable business that actually makes a difference than just making a lot of money. I had a talk on Facebook with a couple of people I really respect today. And it was like, look, if I end up with 10,000 units, all the exotic cars I could want and tons of cash flow, and that's it, what was really the point, right? If I didn't better humankind at all. So I would say for us, one of the things we do in Indianapolis is we really try to make sure that we're serving the people that we're working with. We've got some ridiculously cool stories of people we've gotten out of really bad situations, given them a truckload of cash and gotten an awesome deal out of it. So I would say looking for win-win transactions where you're taking care of people versus, just stacking checks. Mm-hmm. Brad or Andrew, it looks like Brad's actually wants to know how you're sourcing deals. I know you guys are on a little bit of a break right now, but maybe chat about that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, early on, it was, REO heaven, basically. And,
You guys started in what, 2008?
2011.
Okay.
Well, we started before. My dad had started back in 1989, basically. But we in Kansas City got started in 2011. And we were big on foreclosures. Like, we would go out once a week, and we would look at every single REO that was listed in the areas we were interested in. And we'd write up sheets like this and make offers on, so go see 15 of them, make offers on 12, and get one or maybe two. And that started to dry up, as I'm sure you're all aware of. And then we kind of started, but we started a kind of a combination of we were still able to find somebody really particularly looking at the MLS and kind of being first to go on all these deals. We also networked with a large number of wholesalers. And with wholesalers, what I found is if you're always on the list and getting the properties, it's almost always junk. But if you can get in with one really good, they'll give you the first shot at it. And that's when you get the good deals from wholesalers. We also we networked with a large number of real estate brokers, particularly commercial brokers. And then we started looking at larger acquisitions, some apartments, and also some portfolios. And we ended up buying several large portfolios. And we were continuing to buy with wholesalers by looking at the MLS, by looking at Craigslist, by networking, by looking at these other agents and whatnot. And then we also we've done a little bit on the courthouse steps, but not much. And we also started a program of direct to seller marketing. Then we killed it because we just had too much. We weren't able to buy any more properties we weren't able to buy, like, we were buying as much as we could. We didn't need more leads. So we stopped doing direct to seller.
Wait.
After
marketing
a while,
was
we
so
realized
good, you had to pause.
Yeah, well, we realized we got these huge, big portfolios. They needed a lot of, they had a lot of tenants, but they all needed like a light, a heavy turnover to a light rehab, in some cases a large rehab. And it was just we had too much of a backlog, so we just kind of really slowed down. We didn't stop. Like these 17 condos came our way, and they were all rented and needed very little work. And I'm like, I don't want it. And he's like, well, are you sure? I'll lower the price a couple $100,000. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever, I'll take it. And then so we got that. And we bought a little bit since then, but now we've gotten through that. We're starting to get back into it. We're going to begin more direct to seller marketing, as well as probably looking for some larger acquisitions, both with direct to seller and also with networking with various real estate brokers, commercial brokers, and whatnot.
Tim asks, how are you preparing for another downturn to buy more REO deals? So do you think in the next downturn, REOs are really going to make a comeback? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, they will. I don't think it'll be like last time. Last time was, absurd. We haven't seen anything like that since the Great Depression. But they always go up in every recession, and they will probably go up substantially because there's been a lot of appreciation in real estate in the last 10 years since the crash. And there's also been they're still making, FHA still loans 96.5%. There's a lot of high interest, high LTV loans, not as bad as before, but there still are. I say there's a couple ways. The first one is to build up. The first one is don't over leverage. You can get 100% loan from what you have into the property, but you better have some equity on top of that. And that's the whole BRRRR strategy, is you have 25% equity on your property, and that gives you that so you fully finance or close to fully financing, but because you bought it and rehab it and are into it for less than it's worth, you have equity on top of it, and that's key to have that extra equity. The second thing, also lowering your cost of funds, getting out of high interest loans from hard money or private money lenders. Doing that while banks are still lending is important. I made the statement before, kind of in jest, but that you're not really a real estate investor unless you're cash poor, because it's all, these big investments, all this equity. And so you're just trying to scrape together the cash. But I'd say as you go into a recession, you want to build up your reserves. You want to I don't know when this recession will hit. It might be a year from now. It might be 2 years from now. But it's coming. I think we're at the second longest consecutive run without a recession in the history of the country. So it is coming. I don't know when, but it will be in the next couple of years. And you want to have liquidity in case, and be ready to, because it's going to be harder to get bank loans when that happens. It's going to be hard to get any sort of debt or extra things. You want to have some liquidity. So if you can start it's not necessary. And I'm not saying you can't. There are people in positions where you really can't because you're just getting started or whatnot. But it makes it all the more important to get good deals and not settle. And also, if you can start building up cash reserves, do it. And then the other thing is continue, like, work with your private lenders. Any private lenders you have, any equity investors, make sure you're in constant communication with them. Make sure you kind of like hinting, like, this is going to come. And also, don't see that as a bad thing. Like, when it comes, some people will get wiped out. People aren't ready for it will get wiped out. People who think that, real estate always goes up, they're going to get wiped out. Or I'm going to leverage 100% with my private lenders, even though the property's not, so I have 100%, debt to equity. They're going to get wiped out. But for those who don't get wiped out, it's an enormous opportunity. I mean, I know a lot of people, including ourselves to a certain extent, really made our business because of, not in spite of, because of the Great Recession. And that's, that what happens in recessions is, one of the big things that happens, you don't see this in the statistics, but these millionaires become not millionaires, and these not millionaires become millionaires. The assets just change hands because, they're over leveraged. They have too much debt. They have to sell at fire sale prices, or they get foreclosed on because they can't make their payments. And then all these assets that have an underlying value that can't be realized because the market has been flooded and there's no liquidity, or get bought up on the cheap by people who are ready for it. And those people become millionaires, and the former millionaires become not millionaires, or maybe completely insolvent and bankrupt. So it is, if you look at a chart, I saw this once of Warren Buffett, during good times, he just trails the market. It's just like in sync. And then a recession, the market goes down and he just skyrockets up because he's buying those properties, buying the stuff on the cheap. Recessions are, they're bad for the country. They're bad for people. They're terrible. I'm anti-recession. But as far as an opportunity, if you are ready for it, they are the best opportunity you can possibly have in real estate or anything, and especially in real estate, because real estate is illiquid. And if you have if you kind of get, like, build relationships with private lenders and equity investors and the like, and you kind of make sure they know how you see recessions and try to convince them to see them in the same way. Like, this is not something as an investor, to be afraid of. You got to be cautious of it. You got to be ready for it. You got to build up your cash reserves, make sure you have equity in your properties, make sure they're cash flow well, make sure you can stomach some, higher vacancy rates, make sure you can stomach higher delinquency rates. But if you can do all those things, they're an enormous opportunity. And that's the way I like to look at them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys all for coming in and hanging out. We're going to wrap this up here, but this is probably something that we'll do somewhat regularly. Andrew will be back on. I've actually already had a couple other people reach out to me that are interested in doing them, that are, not your typical, hey, I'm a wholesaler who's done 3 deals type of interviews. So be sure to hit Andrew up on Biggerpockets. He's going to send us the documents talked about. We'll throw them in a Google Drive, and I'll go ahead and share that link with anybody here who wants that. Andrew, anything else in closing?
Yeah, please check out, I wrote that long article I wrote, goes over a lot of these same points and goes over them in more detail. Please check that out if you like it. I'd really, really appreciate sharing it. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, not a problem. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys next time.